Welcome back to the Copywriters Podcast with your host, the world's greatest copywriting coach, David Garfinkel. David, how are you doing today, man?
Good, Nathan. How are you?
I am good. I'm excited. We've got a return of a very special guest, and man, I'm just looking forward to today's conversation because we're going to dive into some very relevant and not often explored topics on the Copywriters Podcast today.
Absolutely. So to get to the guests in a moment, but I just want to say long before there was even TikTok, that time did exist, in case you didn't know, there was a company called Sherwin-Williams, and they had a very famous logo. It showed a planet-sized can of paint, pouring paint all over the globe with the tagline, "Cover the Earth." They still use that logo today, but I think in spirit, if not in reality, they need to share their slogan with AI because AI is drenching its way into everything. And you said we have a guest. Yes, we do, of course. And he's our returning champion, attorney Rob Freund. Rob knows advertising and IP law for marketers as well as anyone I've ever met. And we're going to have a wide-ranging discussion with Rob about AI and the law as it applies to copy and other topics of interest to you and me. I'm constantly impressed by Rob's savvy posts on Twitter. Maybe we'll talk about some of them today. Rob is well recognized in his field outside of Twitter and TikTok. The Wall Street Journal, New York Times, Bloomberg Law, Fox, Forbes, they've all quoted him. Plus, Rob has lectured about social media law at the University of Southern California and other major institutions in the US and Europe. So before we get into it, I ask all the AI bots to cover their ears. And I say to you, copywriters and marketers, copy is powerful. You're responsible for how you use what you hear on this podcast. And most of the time, common sense is all you need. But if you make extreme claims or if you're writing copy for offers in highly regulated industries, you may want to get a legal review after you write and before you start using your copy. My larger clients do this all the time. Rob, thanks for coming back.
Thanks for having me back.
Yeah. To start things off, I'd like to talk about a couple of recent developments of note with AI. First, another friend of the podcast, Ben Settle, posted this on Twitter, said, AI will literally make stuff up and provide fake URLs that don't exist. It even add dates to blog posts and keywords into the URL to make it seem more legit. Example answer. Sure, here's the page, Ben Settle, where he says on his website that Sean Corbett is his favorite copywriter. And then there's a detailed link, and that says, no joke, I tested this a couple times, including asking it about a website I built from the ground up, and I always controlled. ChatGPT told me to check out 2 pages that don't exist and never existed. Fun times. So, yeah, that's the first one. The second one is something you posted, Rob, which cracked me up and made me shake my head and, laugh to keep from crying. It was about the lawyer who used ChatGPT in a court case. New York Times reported it. Maybe I'll start and you'll finish, and then we can sort of, get into this. The suit, Times says, this lawsuit began like so many others. A man named Robert Matta sued the airline Avianca, saying he was injured when a metal serving cart struck his knee during a flight to Kennedy International Airport in New York. So the lawyer for this guy submits a brief, and it cites more than half a dozen relevant court decisions: Martinez versus Delta Airlines, Zickerman versus Korean Airlines, Bargese versus China Southern Airlines, and others, along with a discussion of the tolling effect of the automatic stay on a statute of limitations. And there was just one problem. No one, not the airline's lawyers, not even the judge himself, could find the decisions or the quotations cited in the brief. ChatGPT had made the whole thing up, invented everything. Apparently, this guy's going, as we record this a week from now, there's going to be a hearing on sanctions for the lawyer who was basically submitting false information to a court of law. Not a good idea for a lawyer, I guess. Um, what does this tell us about the legal dangers of using AI, not just for lawyers, but also for copywriters?
Yeah, the that case about the lawyer is more, I guess, directly relevant to the law. Anytime a lawyer submits something in writing to the court, there's a rule of federal procedure that basically says by affixing your name to something, you're representing that it's accurate to the best of your knowledge, and you've done diligence into looking into any factual assertions you made, and you're not advancing some argument that you know to be false or anything like that. And by just blindly relying on a piece of software to do the writing and the research and the citation for you, you can't really comply with that rule when you submit something to the court if you haven't verified that the cases actually exist and the argument that you're making supposedly backed up by authority. If that authority doesn't exist, you have a problem, and this attorney's finding that out. And what was amusing to read, but not really a laughing matter for practical purposes, is that the sort of his explanation for why he trusted the citations was that he asked ChatGPT itself, like, "Are you sure these cases are real?" And it said, "Yes, here are these other cases that support what I'm saying." And he apparently thought that was sufficient, or at least that's what he tried to come up with when this was discovered. So it makes me think about all the posts we're seeing about how lawyers' jobs are going away now that AI is here, and you won't need a lawyer in the future. But I think more broadly, what it really shows is that, yes, in the future, who knows how far distant, AI will become more powerful, and maybe it will get to the point where it can competently do research and writing that attorneys can more quickly review for accuracy. But right now, it's a tool like any other tool that requires human oversight and verification. And so, in the context of copywriters, one of the legal issues that copywriters need to look out for is if you're making a claim about whatever product or service you're promoting, you need to make sure that that claim is true and not misleading and substantiated with a certain level of evidence. So if you were to go to Chat GPT and say, "Hey, this is, I have this gummy vitamin product. Give me a video sales letter about its benefits," and it says chewing these gummies will cure cancer, and you blindly rely on that, you're in like an analogous situation to that lawyer. It's on you to verify that what you're saying is true and supported. And you can find yourself in trouble if you're just copying and pasting output without doing that review that you have to do.
Yeah, really good point. And I think the lawyer was saying, "Well, I'd never used Chat GPT and blah blah blah," and he was making all these excuses, right? And I mean, I can see, um, I don't know if you've done a lot of work with copywriters selling supplements or companies selling supplements, but generally, I think it's not just the FTC, maybe the FDA as well. You need to have all kinds of citations of what those agencies consider legitimate research, which is usually, I guess, a peer-reviewed study or at least a pretty rigorous study at a research university. And if ChatGPT makes them up and they're not true, that could land a copywriter and a marketer in a world of trouble, couldn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. That's exactly one of the risks, and beyond that, it could generate claims that, based on the data that's been input to that learning model, it recognizes marketers like to use. So it might say, our product's 100% organic, or made in the USA, or recyclable, and those are other phrases that if the underlying facts don't meet certain criteria, they're targets for class action litigation or some sort of enforcement action from a regulator or what have you. So it's important to understand, Chat GPT, in my opinion, is good for brainstorming ideas, maybe points to jump off of, maybe a list of things like, maybe it would have taken me longer to think of saying something about that. But unless you know where the risks are, you won't be able to identify what can sort of be more quickly added into your copy versus something that, I really can't say that unless I do this extra step of verification. And so in any event, it really shouldn't be relied upon without some like hands-on human review to avoid the sort of risk that we've been talking about.
Yeah, it reminds me of something that happened probably 30, 40 years ago when I was just starting out as a young writer. And I ended up writing something for Time Life Books. And it was in this series of books about home repair. And I talked about, it had something to do with how to know if a wire is safe in the wall or something like that. And I wasn't as thorough or thoughtful as I could be. And I'll never forget this. It was like the worst dressing down I'd ever had from anyone in my life. The editors started to run through all the things that could go wrong, all the people that could die, the fires that could get started, the houses that could, blow up, I don't know, for all I know, I might have shorted out a whole city with my bad research, according to him. And what I'm thinking is, if you're using Chat GPT, you need to become that guy. You need to really take a harder look at your copy than you normally would, because you're not sure where the underlying facts came from. And I think you need, as a copywriter, you need to do that before you send it to your copy chief or to your client, or if you're a copywriter for your own business, before you send it out in the market.
Yeah, I completely agree. Like I mentioned, I think it can be very useful in its current state as a jumping off point for ideas or coming up with concepts, or maybe even very, very rough first drafts of something then is molded into something appropriate. But you mentioned checking the underlying facts that it's based on. It might not even be based on facts at all. And that's exactly what happened with this lawyer who found himself in that unfortunate spot. And one interesting development thing that happened after that case was reported on, there's a judge in the Northern District of Texas who issued a standing order, which is basically a judge's individual rules for everything that happens in his courtroom. And most federal judges have sets of rules like, I like paper formatted this way. Please don't call my clerk, stuff like that. He now has a rule that says anytime you file something in my court, the attorney needs to file a certificate attesting that either no part of the filing has been written using generative AI, or if it has, you need to attest that whatever that part was has been reviewed by an attorney. So it's an interesting development. I'm curious to see if other judges will follow suit, but it drives home the point that you really need to do the same kind of review you would do if you were generating the copy yourself. It can save you some time in terms of the initial ideation, but ultimately verifying that is on you, and it's certainly not on Chat GPT to bear that burden.
Well, it's really interesting. I mean, I guess usually standing orders from district judges are boring, but that one's not. That's pretty interesting because same. Nathan and I were brainstorming this a lot before today, because it's such an important topic, and I was wondering. I don't know how much of this is legal and how much of this is just negotiation between a copywriter and their client, but what kind of liability do you have, both in terms of what we've been talking about, the factual accuracy of stuff, but also in terms of possible plagiarism, copyright infringement on other people's work, when you use Chat GPT? And do you have an obligation to tell your client that it, this copy was prepared in part with assistance from a generative AI or Chat GPT or whatever?
It feels like the electric car conundrum. If electric car swerves to miss a goose and hits a child, is the car responsible? Is the driver responsible? Is the manufacturer responsible? Same thing with copy. If something goes wrong because the AI created some copy, who bears the ultimate responsibility there?
Yeah, there's a few interesting issues you raised there. A couple of them legal. One, I think, sort of more of just an ethical question. In terms of liability for misleading or unsubstantiated copy, the starting point, at least from the perspective of a regulator like the FTC, is that anyone involved in creating a deceptive ad is liable. Now, as between the agency and the brand, you can try to apportion liability through indemnification clauses, and those are often heavily negotiated in terms of who's responsible for final accuracy and final substantiation, and if there is a lawsuit, who has to defend it for who, and so forth. But the FTC doesn't really care about your contract as between the marketer or the agency and the brand. So the answer from the FTC's perspective is compliance is everyone's responsibility. So you don't get to say, well, I use ChatGPT and then, the agency sent it to us and we ran it. So it's on the agency, or vice versa. The brand's responsible. Everyone's responsible if they're involved in creating an ad to make sure that it's truthful and not misleading and substantiated. The copyright issues are much more nuanced and much more complicated than the answer I just gave. I admit that I'm not an expert up to speed on the status of copyright issues in terms of source material that is fed into these generative AI programs. I think that there's arguments being made that if you take material that is subject to copyright and you use that to train the model, there's one of the issues that's being worked out and litigated right now is that an act of infringement in itself. On the other side, we have a policy statement from the U.S. Copyright Office saying that the output from these programs like ChatGPT are not subject to copyright unless there's human intervention. And so the natural next question is, well, how much do I have to mess with this to be able to be eligible to have it protected by copyright? And the Copyright Office's response, as you might expect, is, well, it depends. Case by case, we'll have to look at that. But it's not the case that I can type in a prompt into one of these models and then whatever it spits out, I can then go register that copyright or claim some copyright to that output. And then the last issue you mentioned was, are you obligated to tell your clients that the deliverables you're giving them were AI assisted, or that you use one of these tools? I think that, from a legal perspective right now, unless there's something in your contract that requires you to disclose that, you don't have to. There's no law you can point to that says if you use a tool like this in creating the services, then you need to tell your client. But I think that this judge's standing order, that sort of requirement and certification might carry over into other industries. You might see brands who don't want to be paying high agency fees for ChatGPT work product who will say, like, look, if we determine that this is made merely or substantially through the use of one of these tools, we're going to have a problem, or that would be a breach, or something like, or some sort of disclosure requirement. Like, if you use one of these tools, you have to tell us where and how much and so forth. And I think that would be a reasonable thing to start seeing pop up in these sorts of agreements if the brand cares about these issues.
Okay, that's really good. Let's talk about deep fakes for testimonials, images, influencer, AI fake voices. I mean, that's really starting to blow up, isn't it?
It is.
Before we jump into that, I think there was an instance with Joe Rogan. Somebody spoofed an ad with Joe Rogan's voice, and then there was recently a song that went viral with artist Drake and The Weeknd, and it didn't have either of them. It just had their voices inputted and then outputted through AI. And so not just for copywriting, but for branding, for commerce in general, it seems like this is a an area where it's about to be a huge issue.
Yeah, from my perspective, the question I get about this is, well, if we're not really using the celebrity, but we're using either a video deepfake or creating a voice that sounds identical or similar enough where people would think it's the celebrity, we can use it because it's not them, right? And the answer is no. Like that is a publicity rights violation, and it's not a close call as far as I'm concerned. The Joe Rogan thing was about as clear a publicity rights violation as you can imagine. You're commercially using Rogan, and it was Andrew Huberman also. You're using their likenesses to promote a product and literally putting words in their mouth about the endorsement of this product. So the fact that that they didn't say those words, or that's not actual footage of them, and instead it's been altered, that's not any sort of pass or get out of jail free card. Just because technology enables you to do something new doesn't mean that that activity is not regulated, or the laws that apply to similar conduct don't apply, until a court rules on it. That's not the way that it works. Those laws apply now, and we have enough similar scenarios in the context of publicity rights that it's there's no like leap of logic, or it wouldn't the judge wouldn't need to be creative to find that it applies in a situation like that. And the same thing for using voice. The One of the closest analogies that I can think of is that there was a lawsuit brought by Ariana Grande against Forever 21, I believe in 2019. And the issue there was Forever 21 ran an ad campaign with a model that looked strikingly similar to Ariana Grande, but it was not her. It was just another woman that looked a lot like her, enough like her that Ariana Grande filed a lawsuit for violating her publicity rights. That case was the way it resolved was Forever 21 declared bankruptcy, and that was sort of the end of it, to make a long story short. But the claim makes sense. And there's, going back in time, there's rulings from, there's a Ninth Circuit decision where there was an ad that involved, it depicted a robot basically with a blonde wig on the set of Wheel of Fortune. And Vanna White sued, saying, like, yeah, that's obviously not me, but you're evoking my persona commercially, and that can trigger a publicity rights violation. And the courts agreed. Like, even though it's not you, people are associating your persona with whatever this depiction is, and that's enough. So if I were to go and create an ad using one of these AI voice synthesizers, and I use Drake's voice to promote a mug or something, it's really the same issue. And so it's not really a gray area, but it is a question that comes up a lot, because now more people have access to tools that let them do things that couldn't be done before.
I think Bruce Willis was one of the first actors to license his likeness and his voice to be used with AI. And I think Disney now has started putting a clause in contracts for their actors and their voice actors that for future use, they have the right to use their voice for the same characters, even if the actor isn't there in studio recording. So it's definitely something that the law is paying attention to.
Yeah, I mean, you can get even more creative with licensing agreements if you have a use case for it and whoever you're working with is open to it. And we are seeing more of that, but you can't just go and create an image or mimic someone's voice and then use that, because the whole purpose of you doing that is because you recognize the commercial value of doing so. And so it makes me think of a line one of my close friends said to another one of my buddies who was trying to hatch some scheme to make money online that was, I mean, we were all joking, but what my friend said, and now he's an advertising attorney that does something similar. He said, do you think you're being clever? If so, like, it's probably illegal. And that's not a bad rule of thumb. Like, if you think you're getting away with something, or like, well, technically it's legal, that should be a sign that you should pause and really think about your motivation and what the risk might be.
Yeah, that's good. So we've been talking a little bit about where this is going, but if I could ask you to, I don't know, maybe take off your attorney hat, put on your visionary hat, look into your crystal ball a little bit in this way, in the same vein that any developing technology starts out with no regulation like the Wild West, but eventually starts to get regulated. Where do you see AI regulation going, especially as it applies to copywriters, marketing, and IP?
Yeah, I'm a pretty bad predictor of the future. I don't think my track record is great, but the dynamic is interesting because you sort of like with Meta before it, we have like OpenAI purportedly begging for Congress to regulate their own product. But Mark Zuckerberg did that before, and urging Congress to regulate certain aspects of social media. But behind the scenes, he was spending gobs of money trying to undo exactly that.
Yeah.
There's a lot of speculation that that's going on here now. I think the real challenge with regulation is that the rate of progression of AI technology is just going to increase, and that's been something that's been predicted for decades by people like Ray Kurzweil, that the rate of technology increase is not linear, it's logarithmic. So things are going to accelerate a whole lot quicker than I think we're prepared to address. um, I was shocked by the example of the fake the AI generated photo that looked like the Pentagon was on fire.
Oh, I saw that. Yeah.
And it tanked the stock market for a few hours. Like, we're already being fooled by these images, and it really does feel like a lot of this stuff came out of nowhere in the last 3 months. The technology, so regulators are really going to have their hands full. We know the pace of regulation is glacial as it is, and now the technology you're going to have to come to grips with is just taking off. So where that lands,
Yeah. And
that's going to be too creative for a lawyer.
okay, well, I just thought I'd ask. I mean,
Yeah.
plus when you mentioned Zuckerberg and regulators, I think of that famous clip with Senator Orrin Hatch, who is not exactly a technology buff, and he was asking Zuckerberg, "So if you don't charge your users, how do you make money?" And Zuckerberg looks like, "Is this guy insane?" And says, "We sell ads," and the room bursts into muffled laughter. I'm not sure all of the people who are in charge of passing the initial level of regulation, or even very many of them, have any idea, what to regulate. They don't really even understand the technology. Um, I mean, a lot of these people make up shit for a living anyway. So there's a machine that does it. What's the right? I mean, it's like,
Yeah, maybe they would use AI to draft it and not even realize.
that could happen. I wouldn't be surprised. Yeah. All right. Well, this is great. Nathan, did you want to throw anything more in before we wrap?
No, I just wanted to say thank you for coming on. These were some of the questions that our last episode I had at the very end, and I was like, man, I wish we had time to get into all of this other stuff. And I just appreciate you giving us your time to come back and talk about these issues, because I think that they're pertinent, they're relevant, and I think that copywriters need to be aware of these issues. We always say at the beginning of every episode, the importance of how powerful copy is and how important it is to stay within the legal lines. And this is a very blurry gray area legality right now. And so having an expert on to talk about this stuff is just invaluable for us. So thank you, Rob, so much for coming on.
Yeah, thanks for inviting me back. It's always fun chatting with you guys.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you. We rarely give homework on the Copywriters podcast, but I'm going to give you some right now. If you're not on Twitter, get on Twitter. If you're on Twitter, follow at robertfreundlaw.com, ROBERTFREUNDLAW, because he's at the cutting edge. And I hope you take this the right way, Robert. For a lawyer, he's extremely clear and easy to understand, even for a non-lawyer like me. Yeah, and he finds some really funny stuff too. So anyway, yeah, Rob, also many thanks for this.
All right, so follow Rob on Instagram and Twitter. And Rob, what's your website if people want to check out your website?
Yeah, it's robertfreundlaw.com. and Freund is Freund.
All right. Awesome. Thank you so much, man, again for coming on. I really appreciate it. And if you enjoyed this listening, go check out more episodes over at copywriterspodcast.com. We will see you in the future, and y'all have a good one.
Have a good one. Thanks. Bye.